Welcome back to our lecture on parasites. After looking a bit closer at amoebas, let us have a look at the second type of protozoas that can be parasites in the human system, namely flagellates. What you can see here is schematic drawing of flagellates. And the important characteristics here is the presence of the so-called flagellum. And this is the organ allowing the protozoa to move. And as usual, I'm going to show you a video of a flagellate moving in a dish using this typical flagellum. So this is clearly different type of movement compared to amoeba. This can be used in a fairly easy way to distinguish between those two types of parasites. If it comes to flagellates, there are actually quite few able to cause parasitic disorders in the human system, and the most prominent example is Giardia lamblia and Trichomonas vaginalis, and we are going to be looking at those two types a bit closer as well. And the first example again is Trichomonas vaginalis. It causes a disease called trichomoniasis, and it is a sexually transmitted infection. It is the most prevalent non-viral sexually transmitted infection according to the World Health Organization, with 143 million infections per year globally. The symptoms usually develop within a month of infection, and this is actually a huge problem because this large or long incubation period can lead to a spread of this parasitic disorder. The symptoms of infection are soreness, inflammation, pain, and also discomfort. So how does the life cycle of this parasite look like? It starts with the infectious form of the parasite, which can be transmitted during sexual intercourse. It can be transmitted both from the female to male and other way around, and it can also be transmitted in same-sex intercourse. The life cycle is fairly easy compared to other types of parasites we are going to be looking at later today, for example worms. So there is not that much going on, and importantly there are no cysts. So the infection is due to infection with the active form of the parasites. The next type of flagellates that cause parasitic disorders you should be aware of is Giardia lamblia. This parasite causes intestinal malabsorption and traveler's diarrhea, and is quite common in warmer countries around the globe. This parasite colonizes and reproduces in the small intestine. Importantly, giardiasis does not spread via the bloodstream. The life cycle is slightly more complicated compared to other flagellates, so we certainly have cysts, and those cysts actually cause the infection. And the infection usually occurs via contamination of water, food, or hands with infective cysts. So this is the life cycle, and again it is a bit more complicated because after ingestion of the cyst is transmitted to the intestine, where it actually bursts, and the active form of the flagellates then reproduces, forms cysts that are excreted via feces, and the cycle starts again. The last type of flagellates I would like to mention is quite common in Africa, and this flagellate is called trypanosoma. It causes the African sleeping sickness, and the vector here is the tsetse fly. It occurs in 36 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's transmitted from human to human through the bite of the fly, and it's only found in certain rural parts of Africa. Interestingly, in rare cases, it can also be transmitted from a mother to a child, as the parasite can cross the placenta. Good. The last type of protozoas we need to be aware of in the context of parasitic disorders are ciliates. And those guys move slightly different. They move using cytoplasmic protrusions referred to as cilia. And again, those cilia are quite similar to cilia present on the membranes of certain cells in the human body, especially cells of the respiratory tract. As you can see here on this image, ciliates move quite quickly and they use cilia, and you can see them as shades surrounding the membrane here. So this is how ciliates move. So ciliates are actually not that common parasites, and Balantidium coli is the only ciliate known to cause diseases in humans. Infection occurs through contaminated food and water and is usually asymptomatic in healthy adults. However, in those with poor health, it can lead to a disorder called balantidiasis. It is characterized by persistent diarrhea, abdominal pain, and weight loss. In addition to those types, there is also a very important other type of protozoas causing disorders in humans, and this type are apicomplexans. Especially Plasmodium is important here. What you can see here on the slide are human blood cells infected with Plasmodium malaria. And as the name already suggests, this is the causative vector in malaria. In 2015 alone, there were roughly 212 million malaria cases and estimated 430,000 malaria deaths. So malaria is a quite important health problem around the globe. Plasmodium malaria are malaria-causing parasites that colonize the blood of a human host. In addition to this, there are also other species of malaria that can infect humans and cause malaria, including Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium malaria, and Plasmodium ovale. However, falciparum malaria and vivax malaria are the most prevalent forms of malaria. Plasmodium falciparum causes the most serious and progressive illness, and severe falciparum malaria accounts for the almost all deaths due to malaria reported annually. So how does the disease spread? The infection usually occurs after a bite of the female Anopheles mosquito. So this is the vector carrying the malaria parasite. Importantly, if malaria isn't diagnosed and treated promptly, it can be fatal. The symptoms usually appear fairly quickly, between 7 and 18 days after becoming infected. However, in rare cases, the symptoms may not appear for up to a year and occasionally even longer. And this is actually fairly important for us in the UK, since people infected abroad can come back to the country and can develop symptoms 1 year later. And this is something quite important if it comes to diagnosis. If we look at the global distribution of malaria, then we will see that most cases can be found in warmer countries, including India, but also on the African continent. However, malaria is also present in Brazil, and there are certain cases found elsewhere as well. And this overlaps quite largely with the presence of Plasmodium malaria. So again, this is spreading. So what are the phases of infection with malaria? There are two phases we need to be aware of, and the first phase is an early phase and involves mainly the liver. After transmission from an infected mosquito, Plasmodium migrate to the liver and divide. They proliferate without causing symptoms for a short period of time, followed by disruption of cells and transmission via the bloodstream. In the bloodstream, the parasite infects red blood cells, and this is actually the reason why patients develop symptoms. This late phase, involving the blood, includes multiplication of the parasites, which breaks out of the cells and infects further red blood cells, and this results in fever waves in the patient. Interestingly, there is something very interesting if it comes to the relationship between malaria and sickle cell anemia. That's a genetic disorder we have learned about in our genetics lecture series. So as you can see here, there is quite large overlap between patients with sickle cell anemia and carrying the mutation in Africa and distribution of falciparum malaria in Africa. So, what is the reason? In order to understand this, we need to recapitulate what we have learned about sickle cell anemia. As we know, sickle cell anemia is caused by a point mutation in the gene coding for hemoglobin. In the wild-type hemoglobin DNA, the sequence here is CTT. However, in the mutant form, the second T is replaced by an A. As a result, different mRNA is transcribed and the resulting hemoglobin is mutated. We refer to this form as sickle cell hemoglobin. Sickle cell hemoglobin results in a different shape of red blood cells, and those red blood cells are rigid and shape, as the name suggests, like a sickle. As a result, the blood flow is disrupted in the patients with the disease because the cells are unable to move around small blood vessels and can block them, resulting in tissue and organ damage and episode of severe pain. However, it has been shown that carriers that have only one copy of the mutated hemoglobin gene are partly immune from malaria. And this is quite interesting. So here, if sickle cell red blood cell is infected with a parasite, the parasite is not longer able to proliferate that easily, and those cells are more easily recognized by the immune system. Therefore, the parasite is removed from the system before it causes certain severe symptoms. With this, I'm closing the session number 2, and I will see you in session number 3, where you're going to be looking at parasitic disorders caused by worms and also by ectoparasite. Thank you very much.